Alrighty, so for our last lecture, I've already asked, and most of you said you wanted to see a little bit of JavaScript, and I thought, what a better way to do JavaScript than talk about a form validation. You have all experienced form validation, whether you know it or not. Anytime you fill out a form and it gives you, oh, you forgot something, you didn't enter it correctly. That's all done with client-side JavaScript. Client-side meaning right here on the browser in your local system. And server side would be out on the server. We're not going to talk about that today. We're only going to focus on a simple form validation, first using some HTML and then using some JavaScript. Okay. All right. So you have two options here. One is you can code along with me and write the JavaScript. Okay. Two is you can create a new file in your lecture folder, name it JS, and create a README and then take notes. Either way, give me your history. I'm going to do this, and this is where I really thought about the best way because I almost just created a new HTML, but I thought I'm going to use my template. But here's the risk of me using my template is that my code is going to look a little different than yours. Okay. So let me first go over and I think most everyone had a contact page on their template. I ended up having to recreate mine because it was on a single page. Let me go to I got to restart my server. That's right. I was playing around a minute ago. So let me just open my index page here and go live. So for me, I had one when it was a single page, right, where these were just anchor links, but I went in and when I cleaned up my index page, I also got rid of the contact, so I ended up recreating it as a standalone page, and here it is. So here are those basic fields, and I'll go over them in HTML in a minute. But your name, your email, your subject, and your message almost all have this. So at least have a couple of these, if not all of them, if you're coding along. Okay. So that's the first thing is just having the form itself. Now, one of the things is we're adding a feature, and if you're coding along, you don't have to do what I'm about to do. I'm more going to explain it because it is a very common thing in Git and development. And I want to show you this, and it's called Git branching. Okay, in case you are ever after this class in a class that has branching. So in this case, when we're branching, we're saying take whatever, like here's an image, take whatever state of the code we're at, create a branch, and then let me work on that branch without affecting the main code. So I can go back and forth. And then there are times that I may have code or a feature that I then integrate back, which this image doesn't show, but that's the concept into the main branch. But this is a perfect example. Actually, this one does right here. Right, so this is your master branch. If you're only working on your master branch, then obviously you're not branching because this is where you create a branch that you then work on, okay? So that's branching. I'm going to use it in this example more because I just want to be able to introduce the concept because it is part of learning. And again, if you're coding along, you don't have to do it. So what I did is you come down here to the bottom, and if you ever have noticed on VS Code that here in the bottom it says main because it's your main branch. And if you click on that, what you can do is create a new branch. And what I did is I created a new branch called contact form. Now, why did I do that? I did that again so I can add this new feature to my website without affecting the main branch yet. And this really becomes handy when you're working in teams. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the live server. I'm going to go down here. I'm going to switch to the branch that I already have. And I'll show you towards the end how all this code on the main branch is not affected what I'm about to do here. Okay. So in preparation for this, a couple things I like to do just to my editor before I start coding, okay, is I like to roll things up so I don't have so much to look at. It's just a thing for me. So notice in VS Code, when you roll over a div, you get these nice little navigation to contract and expand. So I'm going to do that as well. Oh, my bad. I meant to do this on the contact page, so we get to do it again, which is totally fine. Actually, I already did it on the contact page. So what I have is I have the form itself. Again, this is where your form could look different, okay? What you want to have is the form tag itself. Now, you also want to have the form equal, the ID equal form. And this is a way we grab a hold of the DOM. And this is what is created the DOM, the document object model. But let me actually just show you this in real life versus just talking about it, because I'm somebody who I actually like to see it. So, like, why do we use this, right? You can not use forms, but typically for any number of inputs, and these are your inputs here. We saw this when we got introduced to HTML and CSS, so now we're actually going to use them. So what I'm going to do, so I have an ID form is the only thing required. This class is something built into my template. I'll probably keep it. If there's an action on your page just for now, or on your contact, if you're following along, just get rid of it. So for me, I have this asset directory, right? And in there, there's a JS. So if you don't have asset, then just create a JS folder off of your root. But I'm going to do it in here because I already had a main JS. Now I could write my JavaScript in here, but honestly, there's just too much going on in here. It's too busy. I want to isolate just my code. There's better ways to do it that I'm going to show, but for now it's fine. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to create a new file in here, right? So in this JS directory, and I'm going to call it for now contact, if I can spell, .js. Okay, so that's my contact. This is the JS file that I'll write JavaScript in. For now, I'm going to do a console.log, which basically just outputs into DevTools. I'm going to say connected, and you'll see why in a minute. So with JavaScript, you can either write it inline inside of the HTML, or, and this is more common, you write it in an external file. And not just like, very similar to the style sheet, what you're doing is creating a logical connection between your index file and your JS file, or referencing that so that when the page loads, which is the DOM, you can actually, in this case, have that code available. Now, let's just actually do this. So now over here, because I already had a main JS, what I'd want to do is in my template, find out where that link to that is. And now I looked around before and I noticed it was down here in the bottom. Now, the location of this script tag, again, the equivalent of the link tag for style sheet, is important because of the way you write it, write the tag itself. And they've placed it at the bottom. And now what I'm going to do, and I'll show you why, but I'm going to take this, I'm going to copy it or cut it. I'm going to go to the top in the head section. In the head section, I'm going to go after, I could do it anywhere I want. I could put a comment here showing my JavaScript, and I'm going to paste that. Okay. Now it's important in this case, based on where I'm placing it, to also add, and this is an attribute called defer. And defer says wait to load this until the page has loaded. And by the way, that's why they had it setting in the bottom of the HTML, okay? Because they didn't load, and this is somewhat, when we see it at the bottom, it's a little bit older than this. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say script source equals, now again, this will depend on where you put it. Assets for me is where I've put it, and then I've put it in JS. Now I could type those directly, and then because I only have 2 files in there, it'll actually also just show me. Again, this is my editor trying to make life easier for me. I think it's defer. Okay, so that's up in the head. Now, how can I see if this is correctly connected to my HTML? Well, here's what I'd want to do. Have my contact active, which I do, hit go live. This shows the index, the contents. I go to inspect. And one of the things I harp on a lot when teaching JavaScript is learning. Oh man, there's so much here. Okay, and so I'm just going to reload the page real quick because there was so much there. And see, I have that connected that's coming out of the contact JS. This other stuff is really related to my recording or also just to my template itself. Okay. And notice how the responsive design is changing here based on that. Okay. That's the first thing. So now I know that my JS file for contact is actually working. That's how I would know. I'm going to close this file, and now I'm going to do this little nice option to be able to split the editor view so I can keep my contact, because there's times I'm going to be, matter of fact, I think I'll do this. I think I'll put my contact there, put my HTML there, because I'll be doing more work in the contact. Okay, so the reason we led this little down this little road to do this was because of, and I'm going to roll the head back up because I no longer need it, was this, right? If you remember the where we started here. So what I'm going to do is const is a constant is a variable declaration for a variable we will not change in the future. Its type, all you need to know, it's a variable, a way to declare constants in JavaScript. There's also let, which are the two most common. Do not use var anymore. If you see code with that, you just know it's old code. And because in this case there's another term, it's global, meaning it's at the base of R. And you'll see what I mean about this in a bit. It's not locally scoped, it's globally scoped, meaning it's available anywhere in my code. It's capitalized. Now that's just a style thing. You could have done any number of, you could have written this any way you wanted. And now I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to store in this variable, this constant on my global space. I'm going to do document dot, and actually, even before I write this, let me show you what document represents, which is the DOM. Okay, so the document in this case is your entire rendered HTML, CSS from what, all the code is creates the DOM, the document object model. So what this is the output of your browser rendering that page in an object way that you can then manipulate. And that's why it's one of the most important things we do with JavaScript in this case is manipulate the DOM. And in this case, we're doing it to say, hey, validate something. Okay, so document dot, and here's a method on the document called get element by, and I could do this a couple ways. I could do it by class name, I could do it by tag name, which kind of would have made sense as well, but I'm going to do it by ID because it's by far the most common, and you'll see what this does in a minute. And I'm going to do pound. Actually, I don't think I have to do pound for get element by ID. Let me remember. Let me just go here, form. Let's find out. It's one of those things that sometimes I forget. Okay, so now I'm going to go into my source, right? Because now now there's my source. Here's my asset, my JavaScript, and there is my contact. Good. There we go, right? So now, and this is setting breakpoints, something I talk about a lot. Breakpoints is a way to stop your code execution. I'm going to hit refresh, stop right there. And now what I can do is run that line. That's cool. And you're like, Rio, what does that mean? Well, it's now completed running that. So now what I can do is down on my console, which is not showing here, but that's okay. I can just hit, and that's because of the way this thing is there's not a lot of room here to do a lot of stuff. So I can tell it, you know what, show the console drawer, which is here. Okay, so what I can do is either just roll over that and it says, yeah, I stored in the variable form by looking at the document, the whole DOM, and I said get element by ID form, and the reference to that entire form is now stored on that variable. Okay, now why do I need this? I need this in order to check for certain conditions and to write certain code that helps me with this, okay, with processing this form. All right, now, so I'm going to come back over to here. Now that I have the form, right, I'm going to write one of the most common things we do, which is called an event listener, right? An event listener. So some of the things I'd want to see in your notes already is just the idea of a branch, the idea of a form, the idea of connecting a JavaScript file into an HTML, and this one, which is I'm going to say on form, I'm going to add an event listener. Okay. Now, what I'm about to write is going to look a little complicated, but I'm just going to tell you it's not. Okay. So I'm going to say add an event listener. I'm going to say, I'm going to listen for a submit. Okay. So again, back here, I'm listening. Then this is the submit button, even though it says send text. It is a button that is, in this context, what it's listening for. When somebody clicks the submit button, I'm going to do something. Okay. So and in this case, I'm going to run a function, right? I'm going to say function. There's a couple ways I could write this. You'll learn about different ways to write functions later. Okay. I'm just going to say anonymous function here, right? And now I'm going to say console.log. I'm going to say you clicked the send email button. Okay. So what will happen here, get rid of that for a minute. So now that I have that code in there, I'm going to go ahead, and this is learning about the dev tools along the way. Now I can see in here that I have that console log, and I'm going to change my breakpoint. I'm going to click off of that, and I'm just going to go, and this says pause in debugger. I can just let this run. So now if I go down here and click, oh yeah, that's right. So what happens is, and this is part of what I wanted to talk about, and I'm glad it reminded me, is right now, even before it processes this event, there's things built into the HTML that actually help you do form validation. And it does a really nice job. It's not the best, but it's at least what we call minimal. Okay, what are those things? In the HTML, they're attributes called, and this attribute is called required. Okay, so in your notes, required is an attribute on an input that makes that field required in order for it to do the next thing. Okay, so there is an attribute for added to both the name, the email, and I think all of them, which makes sense, right? The subject line, okay, and then the message, which in this case, the message is the one that is actually not an input. It's a text area. I didn't go over that. Sorry about that. But if you want to include that, and yours probably already has it, but as well. Okay, so here's what happens before my code can run. I have to have some content in here. Okay. Now, if I actually at this point just with 2 hit that, then it would still stop me because it would say, you haven't completed filling this out. So now that I have all content and all 4 input, one text area, but it doesn't matter. It's still a type of input. It's just a larger one. When I hit send, now this is what's going to trigger this code to run. It's going to say, hey, I'm listening for a submit. And now the form, the HTML says, okay, now you've given me all the required fields. Let's actually process what code the programmer has written inside of their function. And this is called a callback function, but whatever at this point. Okay, not whatever. It's really important. So let's go ahead and run this. Let's go ahead and hit submit. And look at that, right? So now we know that our event listener is actually working. We know that something's coming out. And now we can write code that actually allows us to handle that form submission. Okay. And just to be clear, if your form, which most do, have an action equals, and it probably has some kind of URL. Okay, now don't put this in your code. I'm just showing you here. This is because most forms, when they are submitted to either a backend tracking to where they track that data. I mean, think of all the different ways you enter information into a browser every day. There's different ways, but it's almost all server side. But in our case, we're not going to handle the server side because this is what we call client side. So if you didn't hear me say it before, this is client side JavaScript. Okay. Okay. So at this point, I know, what was I talking about? Right. So because I know I want to handle this myself, one of the things I'd want to add into here is, and actually I want to add an E here. Now I'll tell you in a minute why I want to add E. So I'm going to do E dot prevent default. Okay. And all that does is say that, hey, the normal submission where I'm because HTML forms assume you're submitting to a backend server somewhere, but because we're not, we're going to handle it all ourselves. And in this case, we don't really see any impact. There's actually something in the URL when we're writing that from scratch, but they have something in here, I think, that is preventing even that from on there. It's probably somewhere in that main.js, but that's not that important. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. So now what we're going to do is write some code. We've already written just the console log right here. So now what we can say is we can actually write some logic that looks at our form and says, hey, is that a good form submission? Now, because we already have these required fields, we could kind of assume, yeah, maybe they gave us good data. So one thing we could do is just gather that content that they gave us. Okay. So in JavaScript, there's a really easy way to do that. So like on name right here. Okay. Because we have used this property called name, one nice thing we can do is use that in JavaScript to grab that value. Let me show you what I mean by that. So right now, and I'm just typing on the console to show you, I'm going to end up writing it in here in a minute. But if I type form dot, okay, actually I should show you it the other way. There's two ways to do this, and I'm just going to show you how to grab the values, either from the form or from the E, which is the event that was listened for. So actually, I think I'm going to back up. I think I'm going to do this. I think I'm going to end up putting a breakpoint right here after the event. Actually, right here, I can't put a break. You have to put a breakpoint on the line itself. Okay. Yeah, because I will at that point have the E. And then I'm going to put in here, just put in some garbage here. Okay. And then I'm going to hit submit. Oh, look at that. Oh, I was wondering. Sorry, I need to go check something. I didn't look for this. Nice. Nice. Form control. There must be some other on that main or somewhere else that actually is checking to make sure that I've given a properly formatted email. That's awesome. I should go find that code. But in this case, here we are. We're paused right here. So what we can do is to grab the user, your name, right? We can write code, but we can also just down on the console type e.target dot, in this case, we can just reference the name. And notice what happens because we've named this in JavaScript. Again, what we're doing here is referencing that name here. Okay, there's other ways we would use the other places you see name. Okay, but in this one specifically, and this is just in my example, type, which is the type of input, and then we hit name. Okay, so if I reference that, then what I could have is access to the entire input. But what I want is the dot value. Okay, and this would then reach in to reference on the DOM that input value. Okay, that's where you can reference that. So now let's actually do that in code. And this is, one of the things, if you take my JavaScript course, which I hope you do, after, because it's an important part of web development and just great language to learn. I could say constant. I'm going to again declare a variable. I'm going to say name equal. I'm going to paste that e.target.value. Okay, so now I have access to that name. Now, we could go through and do the other ones, but for purposes of brevity and just getting through it, I just want to tell you, right? That's one of the things we can do. Now, so this introduction has already introduced you to some of the fundamental things inside of web page development around JavaScript. Now it's a very simple thing, and the last thing we'd probably want to do, again, you could do the same thing for the message, same thing for the subject, same thing for the email. Okay, you could grab those in the same way. But what I want to do now is actually want to just present this content back to the user. Oh, nice. Okay. That what they gave us, just the name, just to show you how to present something back. And this is the other major part of what we do when we're writing JavaScript for HTML, is we're then updating the DOM with the output of our code, the processing of that code. So what I'm going to do is just finish up showing you a simple way to output to the page itself. Okay. All right. So let's find a place. I'm going to find a place in mine. I had a loading message before. Oh, here we go. Sent message, and it's got a class on it. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I could say ID equal, and then I'm going to call this sent. Sent. Let's leave it that. Okay. And so what I can do here now, now that I have that, I would then come over here and I would say const, and I would say sent. I would probably say sent div, but okay, document. I bet you know where I'm going. Dot get element by, and in this case, I'm going to put sent. Okay. So now I have access to that div. And so in my code, I can say, right? Let me just make sure where I'm at here. Cool. Okay. So now that I have the name, I can say sent dot text content equal to name. Now, there's other ways and more elaborate ways you can imagine to do this. There's something called create element. That's something we get to in JavaScript. But in this case, we at least can update the text content of this div. Okay, so let's see if this works. So I'm going to say, I'm going to take off the breakpoint because I no longer need it right now. Let that run. I do have to fill it out. So, and then I could actually have it do this. Okay. So now when I hit send message, right, these are the lines of code, including the console log that should run. So look at this. So it actually did output the name. So that now with that, you have, right, all the components, the major stuff. Okay. Let's just go through them. You have form, you have variables, you have ways to reach into the DOM, the document object model. You have an event listener that you can list for particular events. There's a ton of them. I didn't talk really about E, which is the target, which is basically the target of, matter of fact, just because I think it is important and I didn't really cover it. If I do it here and I hit my breakpoint and I type E, what you can see is here is all the content, all the results of that form submission that I can then grab some of that, keep what in this case this is an object here. An object is a type of data type in JavaScript. Like there's primitives and then there's data types. But again, take JavaScript if you want to know more about that. But in this case, I'm listening for, and I have the E, and off the E, I say prevent default because forms assume you have a server side. We don't have, in this case, a server side. Okay, I grab off of that form or off of that target, I grab e.target.name because name was used in the HTML so that I could then write JavaScript to target it. And then I set up another, in this case, global variable called sent. And I said, get that element by ID, that div at the bottom. And then I just said text content and I said name. Now, this is a horrifically bad simplified example that is not complete. but I think it shows you at least the potential of why JavaScript is so popular and so important for developers. The one thing I also want to see in your notes or in your code is to make sure you did include that, just because I want to see that if you're coding along. By the way, if you're coding along, go ahead and do the rest of these. Play with this a little more. If you're taking my JavaScript class, we've done something like this already, written more. Uh, uh, we've written more about actually custom validation. What we've done here is we've used the HTML built-in required to handle our validation. But in this case, you would also then add on top of that your custom validation. I jumped off here by going into the script to make sure you have in the head section also talked about why we put these script tags at the top, because we use the deferred attribute. So again, this was not just JavaScript, because you can't, I mean, you could learn just JavaScript by itself, the language itself, by learning a language, but almost everybody who learns JavaScript uses it in a web page. So I've done an introduction, maybe not, well, matter of fact, you could give me feedback on this first time I've done it. And I know it's a little bit longer. Let's see how long this one was. This one was 30 minutes. That's about what you've been listening to, so it's not that different. Okay, so if you did notes, give me your notes. If you did the code, what I'd want to see is just a working form, and did you output something back to the browser? And if you did more than that, awesome. I'd like to see that as well, because you could make a little some funny message here about, hey, thanks for reaching out, right? Something you would normally see like that. All right, thanks so much, and I'll talk to you later.